Yeah, thank you. My name is Jakob Ingemann Parby, as you mentioned, and I'm a curator at the Museum of Copenhagen. Actually, at the moment, I'm doing my PhD, so I'm a little disengaged from regular museum work. But I've been working a lot with this project over the last, I guess 4 or 5 years, actually, even from when we started to conceive it, and then it's been running since the spring of 2010. And the occasion was, I guess, the project is called The Wall, which sounds in English quite, not necessarily very inclusive. It could sound like the Berlin Wall or the Pink Floyd Wall or something like that, and then you would have all these kinds of traumas involved in it. But in Danish, it's Væggen, which is more like this, something that you can post stuff on, and maybe you could most easily compare it to the Facebook wall. So that's just to get you an idea. And we made this project with a company from New Zealand, so this was quite an issue all the time. We started out with this title of it, and we tried all the time to name it something else, because they kept saying, oh, we can't call it The Wall in English, but it stayed like that. And even despite the title of it, we actually are about to promote it to other parts of the world, like El Paso and Cairo and other interesting sites in the world, maybe also very conflicted sites. So it's not been too much of a barrier. The idea with the wall was, I might start with this one. No, sorry, I just told you. We are originally we were in 2007, I guess, quite a traditional city museum. You could visit us. You can walk through the city of the history of the city from, we are not as old as London, so from like the year 1000 or something like that, and then up to the present, which was still 1996 because the exhibitions hadn't been renewed. so there was this, and many people want that in a city museum, and when they visit us now, some visitors actually request, why don't you have this where you can walk through the whole city history? Because we changed it, and that's the decision you made. And what we wanted to do was to try, as my two former speakers talked about, try to engage people in other ways, to make more dialogical kind of exhibitions at the museum, and also to renew our practices outside. Then I can take the quote. This is a quote from an excellent issue of the Museum International Journal, which was about city museums, and Duncan Grucock, who have written this very interesting piece, and I just focus on the last part. He's talking about that you can't imagine museums of cities not existing, and if they didn't, you would have to create them, actually, because cities are so important nowadays and are increasing in importance in all kinds of ways. But the very interesting thing in this context is his last statement about the museum as a network distributed conversation rather than an inward-looking institution. I don't think I have to expand so much on that based on the previous speakers, that obviously this is one of the trends in museums nowadays, and we also want it to be something like that, a network distributed conversation. And then the question was, of course, how do you actually do that? I just as well reveal it to you from the beginning. The wall is this is the wall, actually. And this is the wall in its physical version, because obviously this project is more than just that very impressive and cool giant touchscreen. It's also a website. It's also a user-involving, user-contributing project. You can see the physical version again is like a 12-meter. It's a shipping container that's refitted, and the screens are actually 4 screens, but they are 10 meters long altogether. So it's quite impressive when you stand in front of it, and particularly at the time, because in 2010, still at least in Copenhagen, there was no screens left this size. Nowadays, the they've done some more actually. I don't know if it's we inspired them or just the technology developing. And then in the ends, you could see there were actually normal displays of objects. And this was because the occasion for making this wall was that we were going to have a new metro in Copenhagen, a big expansion of the existing metro system, where you had like a circle that would run through most of the inner neighborhoods, whereas the first step of it was just from the airport to the city or something like that, and not much more. So this was infrastructurally interesting, and we thought it was also something that was frustrating to many people, and it still is, because it means that the city, until 2018 or something like that, there's building sites all over the place, and traffic is hindered and stuff like that. But to us, it was a great occasion also, because we also have the responsibility for the archaeological excavations in the city. So all these digs that were going to be made prior to the establishment of the stations, particularly, they would uncover, well, we knew some of it in beforehand, but they would uncover impressive things. For instance, some of the old city gates, which, well, unfortunately, we couldn't keep them all in our collections because they are so huge, but it was very interesting to actually excavate them and see them for real. So we sold this project to the municipality, that instead of just making, as in other digs, just some posters or telling about what we were digging, we could actually use the occasion to, well, alleviate a little of the pain that this metro digging was causing to the Copenhageners, but also making our collections accessible in a much wider way to people, as well as inviting Copenhageners to share their images with us, and to, in a way, expand our collections, because I'll come back to that. There's some issues that are really typical. I don't think I have 45 minutes or something like that, so I'll probably send, my presentation is probably longer than it's really, I tried to cut it down to this, but I'll go through something like this. I'll talk about how we conceptualize the project. I'll talk a little bit about the specific development, creative processes, a little bit about how it works, and then in the end I would turn my focus more into what are the experience we got from this. How has it worked? What are the images that people are uploading? How has it affected the museum? How has it affected my colleagues and myself in our way of thinking? I would state right now that I'm really convinced that having these kinds of projects is really important, actually, for museums to develop more and more. So the early vision, when you dream, you can dream big. So we thought we can get as many funds as we liked. So we dreamt of building a 25-meter wall. That would really be cool. Like you can have almost all across the City Hall Square, which is the biggest square in Copenhagen. We would have this big screen, and we would even make it so that if you walked alongside it, there would suddenly appear a historical figure walking in it, and you would sort of walk alongside the historical figure, and it would say, "Oh, who's he?" And then you'd be interested in investigating the installation further. And the graphic people designed, this is a prospectus that we made, on which we fundraised. And you can see there's a lot of happy dancing people in front of the wall, and the big digging cranes inside behind it. Another thing that we thought was that we would actually very much base it on this new city ring, the metro that was being built. This shape is the shape of the new city ring, and we thought that at first that we would make the whole installation so that you could actually pick a particular station, one of the new stations, and then you could be able to sort of turn the time below it, or turn the theme, and then you would have maybe Hamtorvet or the City Hall Square in the year 1500, and then you would have the theme of war, or you would have the theme of poor poverty or whatever. And that was a very good way of thinking about it. But when we approached the designers and the graphic people, this changed quite a lot. It's still somewhere in there, but the experience was much, much cooler than this, which would have been, I guess, in the end, quite fastidious. We also knew that we wanted to make it, because we wanted to make it intuitive, we want to make it explorative, we want to make it discursive, interpretive, safe, user involving. And we also want it to be not like a Google map or something like that. It was invented actually in 2010. We wanted to make it more like the way you actually experience the city. Of course, we could recreate the way everybody experienced it, but everybody knows who lives in the city that you don't remember each part of the city as equally well, and you have some parts of the city that are for you personally, or just because they are more prestigious somehow, that they stand out when you think about the city. When you walk through the city, you have a much more dense sort of experience in some areas, and in other areas you think this is a boring area, I just walk through it, I don't really care about it, and it doesn't mean anything to me. So we wanted to have that in there as well. We also thought about it as a sort of a modern version of the square or the park, where everybody would meet in the old days and talk and look at each other and exchange, all kinds of norms and ideas. This is one of the oldest park in the city in 1787, where all kinds of classes meet, and even a few black people actually there, which is very rare in Copenhagen at the time, but there was a few, often servants. But then we approached the graphics company and the design company that we're working with, called, actually A Waste of Time is the title of the company, but they weren't a waste of time to work with. This was how they started to recreate this version of the different things that you could turn into shape. And I admit that when we saw that first, especially we saw the moving version of it, we were quite breathtaking, and we thought that this was really, really cool, and this actually gave that feeling of personal space, and I want to go down that road, I want to look what this is, and I want to click there. And as you can see, it's not like just an image of the city. We still call it the cityscape, for lack of a better Danish word, and I still think it's a wonderful word, the cityscape. But it was really a way of doing 2D in a 3D kind of feel. And I'll show you a little bit of a movie later on, so you can see how it works more properly. But this gave that feeling, we thought. Obviously, I can just reveal that as well now. To some, this is also a very frustrating way of looking at the city, because some people just want Google Maps. Some people just want to go to that station and they know that the City Hall Square is there, and they want to go there. We tried to create it in a way so that you still can actually geographically, it still fits somehow, that if you are in the City Hall Square, you have to go right to get to Tivoli or whatever, and you have to go left to go to that square. So it's not like it's just random where things are in the cityscape, but it's much more this intuitive way of approaching it, and you have to buy into that somehow. To create it, we had to do it like this. They actually had to develop a new tool for a software where they could build the cityscape simply and take these sort of parts of an image and put into the cityscape. And you can see here very simply that this is the man diving out from the, I don't know what it's called in English, but he's jumping out, right? And he's in the cityscape, it's only the man, but then if you click on the cityscape, you would actually access the whole image, and you could even access albums of more images of that specific place in the city, both when it was a swimming site and also later and before and so on. I can talk very long about how we selected it, and I think you might want to see how it actually works. How's my time doing? Oh yeah, actually I just put this in because I think I didn't send you that actually. Sorry. Because then I'll just show you how it looked like. Can I go into that? I can, yeah. Sorry. I just need to go down here. Yeah. This is just a movie just to give you a real feel of how it... oh, can I do this? Oh, I don't know. Probably like this. I hope it works. Yes, it does. This is how it... yeah, the hand is obviously just to show you how you can actually control the scape, and so it should be very easy to use, right? And you can move around, and you can go into the city somehow. And then you can go again to right or left. And these orange things you see, these are media stations where you could click on them and then you can access even a cloud of images from that specific site, even more images. And I think when we opened it, it was like 10,000 images in there. And since then, we uploaded a few, some thousands, and users uploaded more than 8,000. So now it's over 20,000 images that you can access that to. And in a way, you can never recreate the experience you had once at the wall. You will always have a new experience, no matter how. Well, it's just moving about. So I guess you get the point now, right? But this will also give you a feel of how diverse an impression that we could create using this way of designing it. What you will also notice that it's not just a specific time period, that it's sort of a mix of all kinds of time periods, and we actually created this timeline function that somehow works where at some sites you can, well, drag the timeline back in time, for instance, and you can even come back to some kind of what do you call that? Like ice age, or something like that, where it's only ice or water or woods or whatever. Before the city was there, but always you would see some recognizable. Some of the cityscape will remain, so you know where you are and stuff like that. And I would admit that's one of the things that doesn't really work well. We thought that was a great idea, but it turned out to, because we made it in a year. And it turned out to be one of these places where it's really, really hard because in a way you would have to sit a historian beside the graphic person all the time to decide precisely how this should look and which angle that image of a site in an older age should look like and stuff like that. So that was one of the things that we could improve if we had more time and more money. Yeah, this was more, again, on how we try to, is this right? Sorry. No. This is more, again, on how we try to, like this, sorry. How we try to select the different, well, what went into the cityscape. We try to think about what are central contested spaces in Copenhagen. We tried also to, well, it should be topographical, but we could refine it as the project went on. And we had to have some monuments or things, recognizable things in there. I already talked a little bit about that. Then we had we thought we wanted to show diversity and also some of the challenges that were in the city right now. And in the selection of this also, I should add, we also had involved actually a youth group, but unlike in London, we were not able to just get youth to come by themselves. So we actually hired 10 people who had a special relationship to one neighborhood and asked them to develop a material for us. And since the wall was developing alongside that project, there were some frustrations at times because we were not always able to tell them exactly how it would look when it went into the walls, and some of them made very cool, almost artistic projects that actually couldn't fit into the final shape of the wall. But on the other hand, a lot of that material is still in our collection somehow and has been used for other purposes as well. But that was another challenge, actually, to create these two things together, which was not necessarily completely intertwined, but there was an idea, of course, as these projects. We also made an extra version after the wall opened, and then it was much easier, of course, because now we knew you have to create images. You can't do too long movies. You can't do projects where you have to integrate a lot of images together, because that would also, well, not work well on the wall and stuff like that. But that's, again, experiencing. This is just an example of how you could show areas changing from the old days where there was the rampart and now when it was the station, or almost now at least. We also had this, of course, we tried to have the personal element in there, but one of the things we realized was, I guess, like in many other museum collections, we had a lot of images of topographical stuff, just more or less empty streets, buildings, things like that. And among them, of course, we had a few like these, more sort of social portraits, up close tales, and maybe not actually knowing who this is, but at least we have an impression of how it was to be homeless around the turn of the, around 1900. So we also dedicated that a lot of time actually to select these images that we realized would work well in the cityscape, or at least hoped would work well in the cityscape. Some things obviously should be there, like the biking, which is a famous Copenhagen thing. And then, well, we actually moved it out in the streets. As you can see, this is also, it's a mobile wall, but it's quite complicated. Every time we move it, you have to have 2 cranes moving it. And you have to make very sure that it's in balance. It mustn't just turn like this or something, then it will be destroyed. So it's always a lot of nerves going on when we move it, but we have anyway moved it, like, I think we just before Christmas we moved it the 5th time. And the idea was from the beginning that we should move it around, so it started in the center, then it went out in the neighborhoods, then it went to some other neighborhood, then it came back to the center, and so on. And we wanted to investigate also how did that actually affect what was uploaded, how was it used, how was, all these issues. And well, one thing that was quite obvious probably, but is still also confirmed by our experience, was that the activity was much greater in the center because there was much more people passing it. On the other hand, use in the neighborhoods, people who used it for longer periods of time and could maybe stand there for half an hour, 45 minutes, stuff like that, and really get engaged with it. Whereas if it stood in the City Hall Square, which is really busy, it would be more like 5-10 minutes. You would click on, 5 to 20 images or something like that, and then you would move on. So, and that leads on to another discussion, which we're still having. What is really the gain you get from this? It's not really the experience of going to the museum, but on the other hand, you have you get in contact with much more people than you would if they should actually come physically to the museum itself. Some statistics then that might be nice to have. This is in May, and I actually think I can give you the updated numbers because I've just checked it. So in May, this 2007, it was 1,200 users. Now it's up to 1,400, and this is because as I talked about, that it hasn't been standing in the center. It's now actually, we just moved it back into the center for the same reason, that we want to see if we can increase use a little bit. But it was in a very interesting and very consistent side in the recent year or so. 9 months, I guess. But now we're up to 1.4 million users, and I guess they are approaching 10 million images, or maybe they are past that actually, I can't remember. There's a function also where you can set the postcard of yourself in the cityscape. You can take, there's these cameras that are really both for surveillance, but also can be used to do video comments on, and you can also take images of yourself and put it into the wall somehow. And then you can send it to your friends and stuff like that. And it's up to, I think, 170,000 now. So it's been quite a lot. And then these 8,000 new images, in many ways, to us are the biggest success, because one of the gaps we saw in our collections before we created this project was that we had a wonderful image collection, but it more or less ended in 1980. And you really wanted more images of the city today. And I guess, again, this is not only our experience, but a general experience of image archives, that you had this period up till, again, 1960 or something like that, where you had a lot of professional photographers doing the photography and then handing over their collections to the museums, maybe, if you're lucky. And nowadays, culture of photo has changed so much, and the practice of photo has changed so much. So how do you actually collect all these images that are out there? But it's also a new way you take images. You all know about the selfie discussion. I mean, they would never have been taken before selfies, before we had invented social media and all that. So in a sense, photo culture is changing, and the city is changing. And how do you actually collect that as a museum, and so that in 100 years from now, people can see how Copenhagen looked in 2000, and maybe also use this change to somehow renew your collections in some way. And that, in that sense, the 8,000 new images are really wonderful, and also, as some of you may mentioned, that the quality is actually very good. I mean, of course, there are weird images in there. There are stuff that you might think, okay, this is not going to survive forever. We probably quit it and kick it out of the collections. But most of it is actually quite good. And there are some very interesting discussions also, both among ourselves, but especially actually among users. Is this relevant to Copenhagen? Can this be there? There was this guy, I think he uploaded a lot of images from Belgrade, and that was, after some discussions, we figured out this was too weird. There was not really a connection to Copenhagen, and he wouldn't explain it to us and so on. So if there had been, we might have let them stick there. Another discussion was this tooth that my mama uploaded. She had an image of her child's first tooth, is it? Yeah. That he lost, and once she uploaded it, immediately another user who felt like this was also his wall, he wrote, "Oh, that has nothing to do with Copenhagen. Why should this be there?" And so on. And yeah. And there are comment fields below them, and many comments are just like cool wall or great product or stuff like that. But
I mean, if I upload a picture, can myself tell why?
Yeah, then you can also comment it. So. Exactly. And you can do it both. You can do it when you upload it, but you can also sort of answer when somebody then questions your choice and so on. And that was just an interesting discussion that ended up, of course, with that we let it stay there because it makes sense. Then it might be important also to note that actually a lot of these discussions about also and all the uploads, most of them is actually through the wall, the website of the wall. And one of the things that you might have thought about before creating the project, but that we may first really have realized when it was up and running, was that in a way we created two projects, because the users that use the website can be very active in there, can be very sort of engaged in the whole discussion about what is Copenhagen, what is this neighborhood. We have a specific area where there's sort of a whole group gathering around it because they all grew up there. So they are discussing who is in the images that they upload, and do you know her, and which girlfriend was it that she had, and so on and so forth. All these very sort of intimate discussions that are very interesting also to keep as part of the documentation of these images. But they might not really go to the physical wall and use all the cool touch and interact with that physical installation. Whereas a lot of users would go and see that giant iPhone, as somebody called it, and find it really cool and play with it, but may not actually upload stuff or may not even find the website afterwards. And this is just, well, one of the things when you move out into the city, you can really not control. Well, there's been actually been a PhD written about user interaction on this wall. So you can read even more about that. It's a girl named Maya Rudloff who has written about it. Again, some are frustrated, some just access it very easily. Some are intimidated by the size of the screens, actually. A lot of people have reacted like that, and they stand around looking for a long time before they dare go and touch it, because they feel like, oh, they don't want to mess up just in public at first, and also the images are so big, and yeah. So it helps a lot when you're there. When I pass it, I always start using it, and then everybody around would also feel like, well, yeah, I want to do that as well. So there's some kind of that in it. And again, if you had unlimited resources, I would have manned it every day, but at least we try to go by there sort of once a month or something like that to maybe educate some users into using it very, very good, and so they can inspire others. This was a man who was really frustrated about the size of the images when you get up close. And the idea with this size is also that it's a social experience, that you can really stand there with your friends and one can navigate and the others can stand a little away and still experience it. But obviously some feel that they are too close almost when you stand navigating the wall. So this man, he tried to use his stick instead. I'm not really sure. I was not there at the time, but I love the images still. It's very cool. If we should talk more about the images themselves, that's both the ones that we have uploaded and also the way that this sort of, I start with this quote about the dialogue, the museum becoming a dialogue, and you could discuss whether this wall project has really created a dialogue. I mentioned some example already of dialogues between users and also between the museum and users, and actually the questions that I gave you about the completeness of the data. We have a lot of, also in the beginning particularly, a lot of sort of people who just knew more than us, or could simply work also as well, things that have gone a little too fast, the year has become wrong or something like that, would actually write and just say, this is wrong, it must be, and so on, and then we would change it. So users actually often knows more, or at least as much as the museum does. But I still argue that the main dialogue is not in the commentary fields, because a lot of the commentary, as I said, is more just, I was here, this is a cool wall, I love Copenhagen, whatever. But the main dialogue may be the dialogue between the images. And this is sort of, well, very harsh. This is the way it looked, the images that we uploaded. There was also a lot of many colorful, beautiful paintings. But I would admit that the photos, at least, was in many ways black and white, and a lot of these streets and buildings and people far away, stuff like that. And this is examples of what came up instead. As you see, there's something very colorful about it, of course. Obviously, most people don't upload black and white, but that's not the most important thing. Also, a lot of images actually get up close and personal in other ways than the ones that we made. And there are you can find some very interesting parallels. For instance, this one is the image I showed you before of the homeless people in 1907, very sort of Jakob like social portrayal, but the professional meeting with the homeless, right? And documenting that they are there, and we have to do something about that. Then one of the people in the youth project we made, he actually gave a camera to a homeless person and asked him to go and take images of his life. And this was one of the images he uploaded, which was a photo of his cupboard in one of the homeless shelters in Copenhagen. I think his name was Shasha. And in a way, this is much more boring. In another way, it's much more personal, because it's actually his life. He has one of these, not even the whole cupboard, just one of the rooms there. Other images, you would argue, maybe people were also a little bit inspired by what was already there. There was these, when you looked at the cityscape, you get this impression of a very, very sort of wonderful cityscape. And then, of course, a lot of the images that came up there also was images of the wonderful cityscape as it looked nowadays. And again, I guess this is, in this case, in this sense, this is really what kind of a very open process, as Mariana talked about. And you can't really control it. And sometimes we even talk before we open. We talked about this as a project where we tried meticulously to plan how to lose control. And I still think that's a very good description of it, because we used a lot of effort into to plan it, and then we lost not all control, but we lost control, and we couldn't really demand what people would upload and not upload and stuff like that. The weather is important, of course, in Denmark. I guess it might also be in Tartu. And there are tons of images referring to, well, both the weather and the darkness and the cold. And then conflicts are also portrayed. This is still an amazing image. Pigeons are very common in Copenhagen, all over the place, as in most cities. And this was a girl, I guess, who just were in the right spot at the right time. Very gross. Another kind of conflict, this is the fans of the football club just outside of Copenhagen, who is sort of the biggest battle with the central football club, FC Copenhagen versus Parby. I don't know if you know the names, but whenever they play together, the fans of the opposing club always walks through the streets and sort of demonstrate their power before the game. And this is another demonstration of an Islamist group, which was also highly debated at a point in time. This is another thing you get, actually, when you invite users to contribute. You can get their documentations of important events, whereas you might not necessarily all the time be able to be at the right spot yourself, even if you wish to. So the one here is up in the right corner view, is the Little Mermaid when she was transported out of her regular spot in the city and sent to China for the expo over there. I think it was in 2009. And this, of course, was a big thing in Copenhagen, and a lot of discussion whether that could be allowed or so on. And then it was really cool that the user actually was there when she was driven through the city on a truck. The one down there it's actually been done a couple of times, but it's what do you call it? Not like an event. It's like a social protest sometimes where people dress up all the statues that are regularly male statues in most of them, and they all get these pink dresses on to sort of demonstrate I guess a kind of a feminist viewpoint. And the last one is one of the new parts of the city that are being built at the moment, and that of course also is part of the documentation that we get. This is another wonderful material actually. This one over there is just to show you that we got particularly good material from doing different competitions with the Copenhagen Photo Festival, which is a yearly event. And then we invented some theme together and asked people to upload images. This one was from a theme where it was day and night. You had to upload one image of Copenhagen at day and one at night, and it could be very different things. So this was a balloon salesman and one of the new beaches. And the other one is, well, another thing you of course also get when you're a museum asking people to give you material. They give you also their history, their historical images of the city. And to some people, some users, definitely that's the use. You don't upload stuff from now. You upload your old stuff because that's what a museum must be interested in. And this was particularly interesting because there's an image of himself as a child, and he was visiting Copenhagen at the moment, at the time. And his parents, they lived in Jutland or somewhere in the provinces, and his parents wanted to go shopping, but he was a very sort of, wild child, so he ran around a lot, and they couldn't really control him. And in the end, they figured out they could just tie him to a lamppost on one of the squares, and he really enjoyed himself. And then they went shopping, and then they came back some hours later, and he was still very happy again. And the greatest thing about it was, you would imagine he would upload such an image, and he would be sort of pissed at his parents that he could do this, but he just found it really, well, not even offending or something like that. He thought it was quite a good solution to a problem that he probably wouldn't have enjoyed going shopping anyway, so this was much better. He imagined how he liked running around the square and playing with the birds and stuff like that. It was also very interesting how you should actually respond to that, because we wanted, of course, to know more, but we also didn't want to say to him that we found it really offensive that somebody could treat a child like that if he didn't do it. So that was very interesting curatorial challenge as well, how to actually discuss this and talk to him about this. Even other users, there were some other users also commenting, and they were very respectful actually. I thought it was kind of cool, and also this reflection that maybe this is another time where today you would also probably be afraid that your child would be kidnapped or something. But here apparently there was not. So there was quite innocent view of life, child life in the city. And this is a user again referring to the snow and the cold and the need for light in the dark Copenhagen. So I just I don't know. Am I out of time or something like that? I'll just finish. Just a few words to end about what it is that's going on with space and place and perhaps also museums in this project. And this is just some of my observations. There's probably much more that could be said about it. But we started out thinking that there was something about identity in the city that was not necessarily connected to the city, but very much to the neighborhoods. And that was the whole idea about, connecting with these, creating sort of a cityscape that ended up, by the way, I didn't say that, but it ended up being much more than just the metro city ring. But that was because of that. We realized if we wanted all users to contribute, we had to have all neighborhoods there. And of course there had to be some boundary. When did Copenhagen stop and stuff like that? And where did we we didn't have any more images. And there's still a discussion, there's still some people I know who think that we should have had the Northwest in there, which is not there. But that's, again, the boundaries. You talked about the boundaries of East End and what is East End and where does it go, and the same thing goes in many ways to places in Copenhagen. And I actually think we achieved that very much when you look at what came up, what people uploaded, that you have this very visual dialogue about belonging to a certain neighborhood and what that neighborhood is. And obviously some neighborhoods are more so than others, and you have a stronger identity of what it means to be from Nørrebro than you have maybe of what it means to be from Brøndshøj, but still the material you get is often reflecting a debate on a specific site or a specific neighborhood, and also sort of a valorization of that specific site or neighborhood. And even if it's one of the more boring areas to other people, then those who upload images would often sort of defend it and say, this is kind of cool actually, and this is maybe also that's why some of the people who think Northwest should have had its own station, because they think that Northwest is really a nice place and it should be redeemed somehow. Then another thing is this thing about moving a physical installation out in the space, often a contested space also. Well, that poses several challenges. It poses, of course, a challenge of can the museum actually can people understand that they're meeting the museum, or is it just, well, as I heard somebody say, this is something the municipalities put up, or this is something, I don't know what this is actually, but it's just a container with some screens in it, but it's quite cool. And also people who really hate it when it's standing there, because the last spot it stood, it was in front of a sculpture that a man, and again, I've passed it several times hearing people talk about, that it's shadowing for this wonderful sculpture that's been there forever, but I really wanted to see that rather than this modern strange thing in a container. So that's one thing. And I would say actually that a lot of people don't get it, that it's the museum. Maybe they don't know that the museum exists. We have like 60,000 visitors a year, so obviously a lot of people don't visit us. If you say that even in the center of Copenhagen there's 500,000 people living, you have a lot of visitors that are not coming to our museum. Then the other thing is, of course, that we also, in a way, changing that place somehow when you are there. that by putting this installation up, it becomes a shelter to homeless. Actually, sometimes it becomes a place where you can go around the back and pee, and that's annoying to some. And it plays a lot of other roles than the ones that we envisioned for it, maybe. So, hopefully it also have some impact in the way that it was intended. But that's another interesting thing. And also a final one about that is actually the way that you talked about following projects up and connecting to keeping enduring contact with it. And it's a challenge also to the museum staff, you could say, that you have something out there that is not really close necessarily, that you have to drive 2 miles on your bike to see. Another thing. And I talked already about this point C there, that of course, definitely the user uploads renew our collections and they change the way we can see these places and spaces through our collections. And the final point, I touched a little bit upon that already with the tooth and all that, but it's been very interesting to see that there are some users who really feel an ownership to the website and who almost are more guardian of the homepage than we are, and more sort of caring about what goes up there and what shouldn't go up there, and what the wall really is and what it isn't, and so on. And that's, again, I just think it's mainly just a positive thing, but of course, again, if I should be honest, I would say that it would be good for the museum to have even more resources and more staff dedicated to keep up these dialogues and try to engage people more and more and renew that context all the time. And that's maybe end with the last images, which is what is the future? Well, the one this is actually an image from earlier in 2013 in the summer, where there was a festival at the spot. You can actually see the statue behind there. But that's at the Queen Louise School, where there was a cultural festival. And because we had this cooperation already with people in Cairo about maybe setting up a wall there, despite all the difficulties that might generate, we made a first version of that for this festival. So the whole wall changed and became Cairo for, I think, 2 weeks. And then we had these artists coming up from Cairo as well, street artists, and they redecorated the whole thing and made a very wonderful, I can't remember if I have this, yeah. They had this cloth with them, and they also made street art at the, this is Cairo at the wall itself, you can see. And maybe also, did I? No, I didn't have the one. Sorry. They also made very wonderful street art in the end of each container. And I must say at the moment it's quite difficult to say if it's ever going to happen in Cairo. But it is going to happen in El Paso, and this is very interesting. There has been quite a lot of contact and people who want to create a new version of the wall. And one of the advantages they would have is, of course, that they have all our experiences, so we can actually tell them what not to do and what they could dedicate more time to and stuff like that. And we could already see that in the Cairo version of the cityscape, that they didn't have that many images that we had, but they had selected them much better because they knew already from our experience and from the graphic designer's experience what to select and what to use and so on. Also, they had access to much broader databases of images, actually, because this was cooperation between different cultural institutions, which again would be a good idea for the future of the wall, that we'd actually integrate images from other institutions who have images of Copenhagen and so on and so forth. That's about it, I guess. There's a lot more to say, but I think to get to the end, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Time for a few quick questions before we go to lunch.
Just a quick question. What was the curatorial principle? Did you accept everything that relate to the city, or did you ever have like really things that you couldn't publish there?
You know, from user uploads?
Yes.
No, we decided it's very actually from case to case that we take a decision, and we are the starting point is that we are very open, that the tooth, for instance, could easily stay there because it has a personal value to somebody living in Copenhagen. That's enough, yeah. and other issues like that. So it's you have to really. I mean, I think I removed a few offensive images, like somebody drawing a penis on an image or something like that, which was really not necessary, and there was no reason for it, definitely.
So actually the risks are not so big, because if you put that in the middle of the city and you get only a few pictures that are offensive, I think it's a very good result at the end.
Yeah, but that was it. The most frequent question when we started the project, before we built it, was, oh, there's going to be mud on it, it's going to be destroyed, it's going to be graffitied all over the place, it's not going to work, probably. Yeah. All the comments and images will be offensive, so you will just use all the time deleting them. And none of this really happened. I mean, there's been, of course, some tagging, but never on the screens, always on the sides of it. And it's part of the deal that the contract we made was the sort of maintenance of the thing is the companies who made its responsibility. And they said that the main problem has been the gate. This, you see the front here, it can actually shut down at night. That's one of the way we protect it a little bit. So maybe 11 at night it shuts down. And this has generated most problem, this lid, because it's the people who operate it, the guards who come and open and close it, they sometimes fuck it up, and then the whole mechanics get fast and so on. But that's been a much bigger problem than the users.
It is fantastic. Yeah. Talk about user participation.
Yeah,
put
exactly.
Something in the street and then get so little vandalism.
Yeah. And I must say I was amazed at, but of course some of the commenting is sometimes, and you have to sometimes run it through and delete a little bit of the worst. But then we also have the function where you have warnings when people use special words. Yeah. We get a warning and then we can remove it easily. So.
Any more questions?
Oh yeah, and people can also report it if they find something offensive. They can report it to us, and then we can
So
deal with it.
actually, I have plenty of questions. Maybe we can discuss something in person because it's already lunchtime. But just to clarify, could you say this? What you showed us in the video, this sort of mashup collage with the pictures. This was done initially, is it so? And later, all these uploaded pictures that users uploaded, they didn't get to this mashup. They were just like, because I think it's very labor intensive to like make all these cuttings and just to clarify this.
No, but that's interesting. That's true that in the beginning, if we had only our own images, and then some of these outreach projects that I talked about. So we had something completely new, but that was only a minor part of it. So obviously it started out being a very historical wall, you could say, and with a lot of historical images mixed together. But we tried to keep it modern in a way, or at least have some images in there that also was something people could recognize. But then, because when we moved it around the city, especially in one spot, there was, it's a very detailed story, but there's a little municipality inside Copenhagen, which is called Frederiksberg, and they, when they moved to their part of the city, they wanted it to be, the digital version of Frederiksberg to be bigger, so they found actually money to fund sort of a recreation of the cityscape. And then we also had a chance to integrate more user images into the cityscape. So if you visit it now, you would actually see a lot of the cityscape content, or at least, 10% of it or something like that is also user material that you can access and see. But it's true, besides that, you have to go into these media stations, and then you can open the cloud, and then you can see also new images.
And maybe one other very small one is that in your terms of use, I checked them very quickly. You say that you contact the authors of the pictures, of those pictures you want to get into your collections. So what's the percentage of the pictures that you have asked to become part of your collections of this whole bunch of uploaded pictures?
Yeah, but that's an interesting issue because we are still, it's coming to its end, its first end at least now, because the original contract was for 4 years, so it's approaching that 4th year. And the idea is, in one way, it is to conserve the whole project as a very important documentation. But then, of course, we also want to integrate as many of the images as possible into our collections, actually. And there's probably going to have to be some screening process where we go through these 8,000 or more images and select what ends up in the final collections. But I think we are dedicated actually to integrate very much sort of having that open approach as we also have had throughout the process. And I think the images can actually bear that. The most difficult, I think the difficult thing will be the quality of the images. That's always a challenge when you do work with digital material. How can you, what is this, the size of the images actually, and can you meaningfully use them in other kinds of interpretation later on? So, but it's an ongoing discussion, I would say, and we still need to sit down soon and figure out the exact principles. I think we will be very open to integrating those.